Welcome, gentle listener. I am Voldemort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and important faces of the Warhammer 40k universe, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And today, we discuss possibly the closest thing one might call an actual hero in all of the setting. Many are mightier, many are more experienced, many are more aggressive or more effective. But I do not exaggerate when I say that this character is, in my humble opinion, one of the most noble of all of those in this dark setting. Of course, I speak of Tu-Shan, the chapter master of the Salamanders Space Marines, the Sons of Nocturne. So, as usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, Tu-Shan, chapter master of the Salamanders. Honor markings cover Tu-Shan's nobler countenance, a physical legacy of his deeds writ into his ebon flesh. These are the branding scars that every salamander has, in keeping with Promethean ritual. Few amongst the chapter, only the most distinguished veterans, ever lived to have them seared upon their face. As regent of Prometheus, the moon of Nocturne where the Salamanders maintain their fortress monastery, Tu-Shan wears a suit of ancient power armor. Two pauldrons sit upon his hulking shoulders, wrought into the image of the snarling fire lizards of Nocturne, from which the Salamanders chapter takes its name. A cloak of salamander hide, a more venerable and honor-strewn version of that worn by the First Company's warriors, known as the Fire Drakes, is draped across the chapter master's broad back. Tu-Shan serves as the current chapter master of the Salamanders chapter, and in his relatively short tenure has already earned great respect amongst his Astartes peers and adoration of the Imperium citizens. At the outbreak of the Second War for Armageddon, in year 941, Millennium 41, Tu-Shan had held the position of chapter master for only 3 standard years. Due to his relatively new tenure, many believed he would be hard-pressed as a leader during battle against the mighty Orc warlord Gazgul Mag-Uruk-Thraka. Nevertheless, the humble Tu-Shan willingly acquiesced to the command of the senior chapter master in the conflict, the venerable Lord Commander Servan Dante of the Blood Angels chapter, and fought with distinction during the campaign. While the Ultramarines defended the beleaguered high cities of Armageddon, and the Blood Angels assaulted the Orcs head-on, the Salamanders lent their strength to the protection of Imperial supply convoys and refugee columns, ensuring the safety of the civilians caught up in the war. This was a task often neglected by the other Imperial forces fighting on Armageddon. The actions of the Salamanders in defending the Imperial citizens of their beleaguered world from the massive greenskin onslaught has often been held as a shining example of the role of the Adeptus Astartes in the protection of the Imperium. During the campaign, it was Tu-Shan who helped rally the scattered and demoralized Imperial forces, Imperial defenders drawn from the planetary defense forces and the Imperial Guard regiments of the embattled planet. In battle, Tu-Shan and the Salamander's elite First Company, known as the Fire Drakes, were responsible for defending one of the few bridges across the Stygies River against a 1,000-strong Orc speed freak column, and for fighting continuously for 3 days and 4 nights. At the end of the campaign, Dante himself sought out the young chapter master and praised Tu-Shan in front of his assembled Blood Angels. This was a supreme gesture on the part of the senior chapter master. For the Salamanders, no greater honor could be bestowed than the respect of their battle brothers. Since that campaign, Tu-Shan has continued to lead the Salamanders honorably. 50 Terran years later, when Gazgul returned to Armageddon at the head of an even greater force during the outset of the Third War for Armageddon in year 988, Millennium 41, Tu-Shan was one of the first Imperial defenders to respond, leading 6 of the chapter's 7 companies to the planet's defense, personally leading Fire Drakes once more into battle. The Salamanders directed their efforts against the mighty rock fortresses the Orcs had dropped from orbit. Their aptitude for close-range firefights proved deadly, and Tu-Shan's Space Marines exacted a heavy toll on the Orcs. Tu-Shan is known to have met Commissar Yarrick, the hero of Armageddon, and it is claimed that the two had an instant respect for each other. Yerrick heartily welcomed Tu-Shan's offer to once again defend Armageddon against Gazgul. As before, Tu-Shan demonstrated that he and his chapter's highest priority was the defense of the common Imperial citizens. Tu-Shan fought hard throughout the war zones of Armageddon. During one notorious incident, an Orc force of 5,000 greenskins had breached the perimeter of a refugee encampment and taken them hostage. So Captain Vineyard of the notorious Marines Malevolent ordered that the camp be bombarded by the chapter's whirlwinds in order to destroy the greenskins. Nearly 4,000 refugees died as a result, but Vineyard deemed them as acceptable losses. Tu-Shan personally reprimanded Vineyard in front of the entire assembled command staff and reminded him that the first duty of the Space Marines was to protect the citizens of the Imperium. At Hive Tempestora, Tu-Shan prevented the Orcs from overrunning the Katrin water purification plant and condemned the Hive city's population to a slow death by dehydration. The Hive ultimately fell to the Orc hordes, but Tu-Shan's actions allowed the majority of the Hive's population to escape before the Hive was overrun and captured. As before, Tu-Shan's inspiring presence allowed the defenders to hold the vital Styges bridge and to prevent the greenskins from crossing and reinforcing their forces elsewhere. Tu-Shan, like all the chapter masters of the Salamanders, also holds the title of Regent of Prometheus, holding the moon of the chapter's homeworld of Nocturne as a feudal domain of the Imperium. He is noted as being unusually strong and powerfully built even for an Astartes, and can be easily recognized by both the considerable number of honor scars he bears across his ebon-skinned face and the cloak he wears that was made from the scales of a 300-year-old fire drake slain on volcanic Nocturne. Tu-Shan has artifice power armor. He wears the fire drake mantle, a hide of one of Nocturne's legendary fire drakes. Its iron-hard scales are near impregnable. He wields Deathfire. The master-crafted power weapon was wielded by Primarch Vulcan during the infamous drop-site massacre of Istvan V during the Horus Heresy. It was thought lost, but was eventually recovered by Vulcan during the Great Scouring. Prometheus. Tu-Shan carries an ornate flaming weapon of ancient design. And lastly, Stormbearer is Tu-Shan's thunder hammer that, according to chapter legend, is made from the same material as that used to create Thunderhead, the thunder hammer of Vulcan himself. In truth, no one now alive knows who made it, but it is the favoured weapon of Tu-Shan, who as a master smith possesses a vast armoury of hammers, swords and spears. End quote. Tu-Shan, one of the brightest lights presently at the Emperor's command, for he is as forthright as he is rugged, yet unlike so many Astartes, Space Marines, he is truly a son of Vulcan, a son of his Primarch. For many Marines play the numbers game, stepping above the morality of war and seeing it simply as a business to be performed at the most expeditious rate with the least loss of Marine lives as possible. Now this sounds callous, because it is. Many will state that the Imperium and the Marines simply cannot afford the grandiose and dramatic stands of becoming too inept of the people to whom they defend. They see everything as numbers, as Marines can only actually respond to a tiny fraction of the calls and pleas for their assistance at any one given time. So from this perspective, to squander these precious resources on a few paltry human lives is a disaster, as by doing so they can then be unable to meet real threats, where entire systems, planets, and billions of people are in danger. So to many, the Salamanders are hopeless idealists who are almost childish in their naivety. But to the Salamanders, the entire point of the Marines is not only to kill, to crush, to destroy, and chase off the enemies of humanity, but it is also to be an example to them. From my view, the Salamanders epitomize what the Marines should have been, or could have been, were it not for the setting they are in. For the dark powers of the Warhammer universe warp and twist all, eventually. Thus it is with the Astartes, one might argue. Or perhaps one could go all the way back to the Emperor himself, their progenitor, and state that the error was inside of him. But the real origin of the issue may never be discerned. All we know is everything in the Warhammer universe is eventually twisted to evil, or at least a parody of what it should have been. For the Salamanders, the war against evil and the enemies of the Imperium can only be won by protecting who they are, as much as the pure numbers themselves. Do not mistake me. They are vicious warriors, and no less aggressive than any Marine chapter. They are Astartes through and through. But their refusal to just judge matters in the cosmic scales of statistics is of a different order of importance than just the defeat of their enemies, a thing that is very hard to quantify. Morale. The Salamanders may seem to be wasting time to their brothers, but they would not even notice the amount of skill of the defenders that the Salamanders had rallied, had energized, and had brought back into the fight. The amount of worlds that have held on past the endurance of Corsairs, Raiders, Xenos, or Traitors, all due to the example of the Salamanders, and a vague hope that they will arrive, is very hard to calculate, but it is by no means insignificant. For me, the Salamanders are one of the most important bloodlines of Marines, as they keep the Imperium going far more than most of their peers, who just destroy its enemies. They show to citizenry that they are valued, whereas the Administratum and the Ministorum may not. Well, definitely do not. The Salamanders do it by showing that they are willing to stand between even a shanty town of a few score humans against a tide of enemies, because they are human, and due to this, to the Salamanders, they have worth. And in his name, by their action, they show that the base citizenry have worth to their sire, and their grandsire, the Emperor himself. It may never be truly understood or acknowledged what impact the Salamanders have on the heart, soul, and fighting spirit of the Imperium, but for this part, their actions may well be the most important of all, and possibly even be more important than that of even the Ultramarines. I have been Voldemort, your faithful servant. I hope you've enjoyed this brief introduction to Tu-Shan, Chapter Master of the Salamanders. If so, then do please consider liking and subscribing. If you do, then hit the notification button, as I would not want you to miss out. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.